I I used to be the curator of education at a contemporary art center. And artists, I was in charge of all the kiosks that say things about the art and bring in the artist statement. And all the time I would get these statements that said everything but what it looked like, what it was about, what was the symbolism, so this is like on a real practical level. So like, and you can interpret this in it for writers, literature. But one of the first thing that I ask artists to do is say, well, what's your genre? So I would say I'm an expressionist. And here's why I'm an expressionist. This is what it looks like, which is what expressionism is. So take a minute and think about like what you write. And I don't know, some people are still students, but you've all written something in a certain style, a certain way. So think about that for a second and just jot down like one sentence that says something about your like, the overarching general style. Even three. Okay, somebody share. You want to tell us what your sentence is?
Okay, but I'm kind of boxing myself in when I say this, but I am an acrostic poet, songwriter, lyricist.
Okay, so so let's be more specific. So, if you're a lyricist, what kind of lyrics are you doing? Are they sad songs? Are they about political songs? Think about the overarching area. So boxing yourself in is a statement to address. I always tell my students, like, if you're making a body of work and you write about that body of work, what it looks like, what it's about, it doesn't mean that that is your life's statement and that you have to do what you said you were doing. You can think about a body of work that you're in at this moment in time, because you're gonna be a lifelong learner. You're gonna find new things that interest you and you're gonna go in a different direction. That's just the way we are as people, right? But if you had to think about, what you're doing now and you had to, describe it, that's what you want to do. You want to share ours? Yours? Yours.
For me,
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't write anything. I just wrote, I mean, I write free verse poetry. And I'm sitting there trying to
Free
make
verse.
that more specific.
That is specific,
Oh, okay.
so what did you come up with?
Speculative fiction, short stories that are observational.
Okay. Do you want to share one?
Um, hmm, I used to do a bunch of fantasy in my creative writing class,
Okay,
but
fantasy.
it might be too broad.
No, okay, but we know if that's one of your first statements, I know what to expect, because you want to paint a picture of what it is you do.
And I did add Christian songwriting because most of my songs are Christian based.
There you go. That really helps me know what to expect if I'm gonna go read your work. So the next thing is like, what's the subject? So if, for example, in my paintings, I do people. And to expand on that, I would say I do people, not portraits. Because I feel like I'm not I'm not working like an Olin Mills, artist, just documenting the way a person looks at 10, 12, 13 in a school picture, right? I do people head to toe, large scale, so that, their shoes, their hands, their hair, the way they look at that moment in time, who they are at that moment in time is important to what I'm making. So think about your subject. So you've got Christian lyricists. So within that, what is a big focus within the religious genre? And we can, so we can get, we're narrowing down, think about a funnel. So if you can think about maybe just one thing you've done or three things you've done, and what's the general subject matter within this, call it, body of work. And there's more than one thing.
That's trusting God, is what I would say.
So it's about trusting God. Okay. Anybody else?
I'm sort of all over the place with my writing. Some poetics,
Okay.
portraits, from observation and sometimes literature, and then also, just sort of, and I guess generally I would probably put all of that under perhaps contemplative or meditative writing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Meditative writing. So let's think about that even further. So if what are you contemplating? Give us a picture of that. Within fantasy, what's happening?
Usually conflict.
Okay, conflict of some kind. And are you using certain kinds of characters to exemplify conflict?
I think so.
So like, what kind of characters?
I would usually make like the class system, like the royals and the common folk.
Okay, so class system within fantasy, just exactly what you said. So, see, we're getting at the non-flowery fluff. So if I'm reading what you have so far, I'm gonna, again, know what to expect. What did you come up with, Chip?
Working at it, but think back on things I write, a lot of them end up being about character or character portrayal.
Okay, and do you have a certain kind of character that you generally lean towards?
But then in speculative fiction somewhere, so they're doing something technological or.
So what do you mean by doing something technological?
One was creating a machine that produces food, like a robotic.
Okay. So kind of futuristic a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit, but it tends to be more near term rather than,
Uh-huh. Writing about
a thousand years in the future out in space, if I do maybe something that's doable but hasn't been done
Okay,
yet currently.
so that, like what you just said, maybe in a little more, we're being conversational, but
Sure.
it's okay to be conversational in your writing, because again, imagine you're telling somebody, this is longer than an elevator pitch, but again, you're trying to be really descriptive. You want to interest people in what it is you're doing. And again, I know it's best. So this is more specific to art materials, like what medium do you use, size, if it's relevant. But in thinking about that in terms of writing, and I don't mean like literally, are you typing or are you using a pencil, but is there some kind of I guess this goes back a little bit to genre and subject, but is there some way that you're using your characters, like, of course, there is a way, but how are you using your characters as the material thing to tell a story?
Couple things that came to mind, for those of us who do some poetry, it's, the different formats for doing free verse or rhyme and meter or concrete or something else. And then in prose, if you, the point of view, right, that's,
Yeah, okay. You can say that way better than I could, because I'm not a writer in the sense that y'all are, but that's exactly what I'm getting at. So think about that for what you're doing. Take a minute. And I guess the idea of size is a little bit relevant there, because a poem can be a haiku or it can be a saga.
So a poem I wrote recently actually was not intentional what happened, but it was, the name of it was A Woman Wear Many Hats. And when I typed it up, it was an acrostic poem, so going down it's spelled woman wear many hats, and coming up spelled woman wear many hats. But when you look at the poem, the way I typed it, it looked like a woman wearing a hat. It was not intentional, but that's what it.
Okay, okay.
so if you get acrostic and concrete, it's saying, oh, that's rough, yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. So that's, again, material. So it's very specific to what you're doing. Again, this is not to box you in, it's writing about things you've done. So symbolism, which of course does apply to you, as writers as well as it does painters, but, are different characters, events, places, things the characters say to each other, are they sort of symbolizing that kind of intangible thing that maybe you can't, well, let me put this in art terms. There are things art can say that can't be said with words. So if you think about like what you're writing, what's coming in between the words, like what does this happenstance really mean in the big picture? Does that make sense?
No.
No.
Right, but not here.
So I'll give you an art example. There are paintings that like the Dutch did way back when, and they were called vanitas paintings, and they were huge floral bouquets and big detail, but they were always sure to show like that the flowers were dying. So the kind of overarching symbolism in that was not just a beautiful bouquet, but that it's about death and things, the cycle of life. So, that was symbolized by wilting flowers being next to live and vibrant ones. So it looked like a process. So is there something happening in your writing that isn't just the concrete things people are saying to each other, but like an overarching, this is a symbolism for X? That's a hard one to think about.
So you're reminding me of something, so in Jacques Derrida, I think it's Swange, one of his books, he talks about everyone having a signature, and typically we can tie that signature to our name. So like as we understand all of the meanings and nuances of our name, that particularly as writers, that it speaks to that overarching symbol that kind of guides our writing or is always there. And so that's what it sounds like you're saying. So I just want to.
Yes. You can interpret it that way. I mean, I know that there's one.
So I was thinking about that in my writing, and I think like, so my name means moonlight or to illuminate, etc. And so I think that, and I've always thought about my writing, did this sort of illuminating, something that we don't see or something that we might miss. So yeah, so I kind of see that, the moon, I would think would be my symbol if I thought about it, we think about all the things that the moon does. I think that I can see that present in my writing.
Yeah. So
But I don't know
you
how to
can kind of more
express that.
specifically, like what is the overarching thing I'm illuminating by this
Yeah.
writing, And that's a tough one too, because, and just like art, visual art, it's kind of up to the viewer. I mean, there is the death of the author, right? You might think you're illuminating this, which, of course you are, but readers
Yeah.
come to their own aha
Right.
moment.
And that's the thing about writing, that the work isn't complete until it's read.
Yeah, exactly. How do you think about that, Chip?
I mean, I thought of a couple of things that are bigger or smaller. The show don't tell session yesterday, or Audrey maybe gave some examples of using similes or metaphors in describing characters, just at a very tight level. Trying to think of an example like the woman's curly red hair was rebellious, just like her nature.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
it was a way to, rather than just saying this woman was rebellious, doing it with more symbolism. That's at a very tight level, but also heard some stuff about, well, Beowulf originally had this idea of a circle of light, sort of like separation of good and evil kind of, and it was, when things were going okay anyway, the heroes had kind of a circle of light around them, and all the evil stuff without in the dark, and that got literally represented some places. The one I just read about this morning was in The Lord of the Rings, where the Fellowship is in a circle in an encampment, and the wolves are all around the outside going, and literally they light up a fire inside, so it literally a circle could be inside a ring of broken down tower, whatever. Anyway, it's just, but it's symbolic of the separation of the good and evil, and that there's still hope and future, as long as you've got that.
Yes.
That
Yes.
circle, no longer still in the circle of life. And
Yeah, that, have you come up with something?
I try to connect all of my characters in some form or fashion. But then sometimes, like, I try to put a piece of myself in each character so that it means something from me.
So when you're in it, as you said, and characters are interacting, what could you say the interaction between the triangle you're talking about, you, character, and that communication? Think about the symbolism that creates. How does one character talk to another? How is the scene you're setting saying something? So when I say symbolism, that was a good example about this interaction that's happening, but the overarching symbolism is good and being surrounded by evil. So think about that, like what picture are you painting with those character interactions? So this kind of, we've talked about this embedded in the symbolism, but if you really had to explain what it says and what feeling it evokes, what's the ultimate, the end goal, I guess you could say? What do you want the reader to know, feel, believe? And sometimes that's kind of ephemeral, even though writing is concrete words. There can be this quick thing that happens when you finish a sentence and you take it in. So think about that one for a minute. That one might be more of a challenge. Yes. What do you got? Come up with.
Are you referring to the one particular form that I was referring to, or just in general?
The hat,
Mhm.
whatever you have decided to do.
Yeah, so the end goal for that particular point was for the reader to know that women multitask. Basically, we're like octopuses. We got so many things to do. We, from dawn to dusk, basically, our work is never done.
So you're inviting the reader to share in that feeling. So that's even a way to state it in our artist safety. I'm hoping to share this thing with the reader. For something?
I think when I write poems, I end up writing a lot about like nostalgia, childhood, and like trying to show the reader like what it felt like to grow up when you like were afraid to grow up and how you can still kind of feel that way even when you're an adult.
Excellent. That's well put. Chip.
Um, thinking about showing that things that are simple and everyday things can have depth and meaning in them.
Okay. That's easy.
Everything from one poem that was about a tree, basically, where it's just a tree by itself in the field, but a person's just there and, you know, coming together with that natural state of, hey, it's there, it's by itself, but this is good.
So kind of elevating the commonplace
Yeah,
into
yeah.
something that's, I guess you could say, precious.
So three things. One, I want them to connect with the point, recognize something of themselves. Wrestle with the difficult questions and look toward it. I think those are the three things that I like, that I hope happen.
That's great. Y'all hitting it. Now, something I don't have on here that I feel is important to, and this works for writing, for painters, part of the statement like I require is where's your inspiration coming from? And when I say that, I mean like they do things like, you know, maybe Dutch painters, or I do things like an artist named Alice Neal, who also does people head to toe. And she really, her way of doing things like really inspired me. And you can see that in my work. So think about writers or even visuals, movies, anything that we can, you draw inspiration from and that we can see bits of in your work. And that could be several people. I mean, I have several inspiration artists for myself, and I kind of explain when I'm writing how I've taken something from each one of these and infused it in my work, and like really describe where you can see that in my work. So think about some inspiration writers. think this is one of the most important things about acknowledging in a statement because I tell my art students, you don't make art in a vacuum. You know, what you're doing isn't original, you know, or I should say, isn't unique, you know, that we are all influenced daily by the things we see. And you can't help but have those reflected in your work. And sometimes you might not realize that you're doing it until you're asked to name the people or things that you're like. So, you want to share, Stacy?
Like my inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically when I do like those nostalgic poems, I always think about like how much time I spent outdoors as a child
Mm-hmm.
because I grew up on this massive farm.
Mm-hmm.
And but then even more specifically, like during fall, when we decorate for like Halloween and stuff, for some reason, I always end up mentioning like my time spent outdoors during the fall.
Okay. So I see that you're inspired by the things that are around you and seasons and that, but think about like another poet or writer that you do, that you're like, that you've drawn inspiration from to do your poem the way you do them. So think about that for a minute. Chip, did you come up with some?
Oh, yeah, there's lots, but Edgar Allan Poe, one science fiction author called A.U. Van Bo, you may not have heard of him, but he's from back in the 50s and 60s time frame. He wrote very tight, hard science fiction. I like Cory Doctorow writes a lot of near-term technology stuff. He's very concerned about big government overreach in government. He has a style that I see reflected in my work sometimes. And then J.R.R. Tolkien and Frank Herbert from Lord of the Rings and Dune. Big stories that I read a long time ago, but that's just stayed with me.
So these writers obviously work in your genre. And so I won't put you on the spot with this, but in future, when you're writing about this, like, so you enjoy Tolkien, you like, I don't know what it is you draw from, but like say, I'm making this up, the long saga with maybe descriptions of everyday objects. And so here, that's what I've read here, how I understood this work of art. And so, and here's the kind of more exacting, like I have this poem and this line represents the influence by Tolkien and here's how. You know?
Yeah, and I know some of it, but it's an E. Cummings. After writing it, I went back and looked at one of my favorite poems from Cummings. And yeah, there's certain similarities.
Yeah, okay, nice. Ladies? She's still right. You
Okay. So, like, even the lazy highway, so many influences, Shakespeare, Gwendolyn Brooks, just any probably Black woman poet that I read when I was younger, too many of them to name, David White, John O'Donoghue, all the classic poets, Alice Walker's poetry, John Donne, Toni Morrison, Keats, Baldwin. And I think that one of the things that they have in common is just this sort of elevating the experiential to the point of spiritual almost.
Okay.
And I think I sort of emulate that. You know, inspiration comes from all these multiple places.
Right.
So I hope that would happen to my work.
Yeah, that's great.
I have Hughes, Giovanni, Brooks Dunbar, and Helen Stein Rice.
And how do you think they're showing up in your work?
I have difficulty not writing unmetered poetry, so I keep hearing their voices in my head and everything's mostly metered and rhyming, so. And then the inspiration, the encouragement to continue to write because the struggle is real. And so just hearing their voices in my ear, having read numerous poems by them, just kind of inspires me to write
Okay,
more.
nice, nice.
I went away from meter first.
Yeah. Well, this is, we're done kind of early, but you know. I should write inspiration here. I'm so fascinated that it's hard for writers to write about their art. I think that's really interesting. And it's hard for artists to write about their art, visual artists. So, you know, keep this sort of, I won't call it outline, sort of just the topics. Keep the topics in mind when you are trying to write this. I'm sure like if you send a manuscript to whatever, you know, if you're trying to get published, you send it to somebody, you know, your cover sheet will be something like this that tells them what to expect, you know. Here's what I hope you'll find interesting about what I'm doing. And then, so it's a good introduction. All right. Is there any questions?
This was good.
I like the way it kind of drilled down a little bit. Something pretty big and abstract and genre down to symbolism and something tighter on a work. Obviously, it's hard to apply to everything that we do, I think, but so I do some poetry and some science fiction
Yeah.
and some creative nonfiction. And so they are a little different, but
Yeah.
you can go back and do it.
You can have multiple statements about everything you do. Yeah. So. Great. Y'all have been a good group.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You've been a good facilitator.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's writers.
That's about the translation between writing and visual art, but really,
Visual arts.
it's the same, you know, I always tell people when you're looking at a painting, you're reading it. So, yeah,